This is my first ever show for the radio known as Law in Action. What can I say? It's exciting to be back in the studio 2 days in 1 week. My producers are very, very lucky. So, on today's show, we have Sultana Tafadar. She is a human rights barrister. I'm going to let Sultana introduce herself and give us a little bit more information as to her background. Sultana, welcome to Ramadan FM.
Thank you, Zainab. It's lovely to be on Ramadan FM, outside of Ramadan.
Very true. Very, very true. And I think that's something that kind of excites me because I can have a bottle of drink next to me without worrying that my throat's going to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. So I'm a barrister at Number 5 Chambers, and I specialize in criminal law, in human rights law and international law. So those are the sort of broad areas that I work in. I've been a barrister for about 15 years now. So hopefully no one will start calculating my age. But yeah, I do feel like I've been knocking about for quite a while now. So, but thank you for having me on the show, Zainab.
Oh, you're most welcome. I mean, so that the audience know how I am connected with you, I know, or I came across Sultana on another organization that we're both part of, which actually Sultana was one of the main co-founders of, called Muslim Lawyers Action Group, or MLAG when we shorten it, which we will actually discuss a little bit later on. But before we get there, so Sultana, you said that you are a barrister of 15 years plus, and barrister's other name is also known as counsel, Counsel, as opposed to the local authority council. And I'm just making that clear because I know when I was young and I heard the word council, that's what I thought it was. So can I ask, what made you choose law?
Oh gosh, I'm one of those sad people that always wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was a kid. I know that sounds so cliched, but it's really one of those things. I didn't really think of any other profession other than the law. And it's really, I guess, growing up, being from a minority background, being female, being Muslim, you kind of have to deal with, I guess, lots of issues relating to discrimination. And so when you face those types of issues growing up, I guess a lot of us want to remedy those situations. And the way to remedy it is to use the law as a tool. And so I always saw the law as a tool that can be used to, create change. And that's ultimately what I wanted to do as a lawyer. And I know lots of people from minority backgrounds like myself who come into the law, that's something that they also look to do. Absolutely. So I guess in a nutshell, that's really why the law, I found the law attractive.
Well, you basically touched upon one of the mottos that I have is that if you want to see change, then you've got to be the change. No point sitting on the sidelines and not doing anything about it, but complaining. If you want to do something about it, become part of it. So, I mean, I appreciate you said it's a bit of a cliche, but I guess if you know in your heart that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do, isn't it? Because it's really difficult. I mean, personally, my opinion is it's very difficult at a very young age to decide what you actually want to do when you become an adult, because you just don't know how many different industries are out there, what kind of jobs are out there, until you've had a taste of something or something happens to you, or you've got a close connection with it. So whether it's a cliche or not, at the end of the day, that's what you wanted to do. And hats off to you for pursuing it and for getting there, because you are actually ranked in the Legal 500. Now, can you just explain to me what the Legal 500 means?
Yeah, sure. So these are directories, so legal directories. And what they do is look at barristers and solicitors across the country. And if they feel that, I guess, if people are good enough, that they will have them in the directories. So they speak to solicitors to find out what people are like. They speak to other barristers as well. And so if they feel that the person is good enough, then they'll put them in the directory. So that's what it means to be ranked in the Legal 500. So
it's to do with your reputation, basically. So you must be very good at what you do. That's, fantastic. I know how good you are because I've got that connection with you. And I've read a bit about you, so I know that.
You're my PR lady, thank you.
Absolutely. A bit of a plug there for you, a bit of a free plug. Now, I want to just discuss some of your cases because I know you're a human rights barrister. And I think, is it terrorism that you also deal with?
Yeah, so in the last probably 5, 6, 7 years, my sort of specialist area became counterterrorism and national security work, and so I do that in the criminal court. So usually at the Old Bailey where they have their trials. I also do some of the work in the High Court. So certain types of cases which aren't tried in the criminal courts are sort of hearings are held in the High Court. And so I do those types of hearings as well. I've also done, I guess, anything that has a tinge of terrorism or extremism, I sort of do. So I've done parole board hearings, I guess, for people who are accused or have been convicted of these types of offences. I've dealt with radicalisation cases in the family courts, again, the High Court. And then I do a lot of work around prevent as well. So for the last 5 to 7 years, that's become my sort of specialist area.
Okay, so can I then ask, is it not intimidating? Because my experience of law is it's still pretty much, you know, a male-dominated area. You got the elitist society in there, and you're a barrister, you know, one of the highest levels. So if you're in one of the higher courts and you're before judges and, you know, you got your juries there, is it not intimidating? How do you come over your fear of that?
It used to be intimidating, I think, initially when I started off. Simply intimidating I guess, in different ways. So one is you have your own sort of personal fears. So when people do public speaking, so when you get up in court, there's always that, oh God, am I going to say the right thing? Are the questions going to come out correctly? How's my speech going to be received by the jury? How will my legal submissions be received by the judge? So every lawyer has those, I guess, innate concerns or anxieties. The other aspect is, as somebody from a minority background, somebody wears a hijab. Initially, when I used to go to court, I used to get stares, people staring at me. I used to get asked questions if I'm the interpreter, if I'm the defendant, if I'm the court clerk, if I'm the usher. And you know, barrister was one that never usually came up in the first instance. So people would guess as to what I was. So that was in I guess, the early days. Now, I guess in some courts where I go to regularly, like the Old Bailey, so the Central Criminal Court, or the Royal Courts of Justice, I guess because I go to those places, I don't get those looks anymore because I'm more familiar, or the judges are familiar with me, the court staff are familiar with me, and also the barristers who regularly go to those courts also know me. So I guess within those circles, they know, you know, I'm a barrister. But in the early days, certainly it was a little bit tricky, where if I turned up to court in not one of the main cities, then there were lots of looks and lots of pondering as to who I was and what I was doing there. But I guess as the years go on, it sort of falls away. I mean, I don't think I necessarily have that. I wouldn't say intimidation, but those concerns. I'm more comfortable, so I know, you know, fingers crossed, when I do stand up, words will come out, because I have been doing it for 15 years and they haven't not come out. Words are something I don't have a problem with, I've discovered. And also in terms of how I'm perceived, it doesn't concern me very much in terms of how people will perceive me, because again, it's tried and tested. I've been doing it for 15 years, so I know what will work and what won't work, and how I speak to which judge and how I speak to a jury. So yeah, so it falls away, I guess, the more you're involved in a particular field, in a particular area.
So it comes with experience.
Yes, I think with experience, confidence levels grow, and you know what you're capable of. So yeah, the fear tends to go away.
Well, that's, you know, really good to know. I mean, as some of my audience, you know, some of my supporters probably already know, I've only been qualified for about 2 years and a couple of months. And it's still sometimes still a bit daunting for me because I don't have that level of experience that you have. In terms of attending hearings, I've not got that much experience either, although it's something that I definitely want to pursue. And I actually attended a hearing today as instructing solicitor, and I was on video, so my video was on, my mic was on, and I messaged the advocate that we had instructed, and I said to him that as soon as the judge comes and I say hi, I am going to go off video because I'm just purely there for reference, because I know the case inside and out, and if there's any awkward questions, I can, reply by sending you a text message. And he was like, that was fine. And the judge came on, and as soon as the judge came on, I don't know what happened to me. I'm so glad I wasn't the advocate for that hearing. My knees literally buckled, and I was sitting under my desk in my own office, comfortable with a cup of tea and a few snacks if I got hungry or whatever. So I'd planned everything, but my knees just buckled. So I am very, very happy to say I'm so glad I don't have to do that. But I know so many people that's what they aspire to. But in terms of your actual, in terms of the career, the area of law that you do, are you able to talk about some of the cases that you have undertaken? Because when we hear the word terrorism, at least certainly when I hear the word extremism, terrorism, you get all sorts of images in your head, you start, I say, forming your own opinions. But are you able to give us a little bit of information on some of the cases, any interesting ones that you've taken, or any anomaly one that you will probably carry with you throughout your life?
Yeah, I can certainly discuss some of the cases. A lot of them tend to go, they're discussed in the press, so there isn't an issue with me discussing aspects of the case. But of course, there are some aspects that I can't discuss that relate to client privilege. So I've done lots of cases which involve, I guess, what they would be termed as domestic terrorism. Then there are cases that relate to people wanting to go abroad. There are cases that relate to, I guess, what would be described as lower level terrorist activity. So, for example, possessing documents that might be deemed terrorist publications, disseminating those, so people sending those via WhatsApp or on social media. And then you've got those are, I guess, the lower level, and then you've got the more serious ones, which are called Section 5, preparation for acts of terrorism. So it's where somebody has done something in terms of either going abroad or doing something in the UK. And so there's a whole range. There are so many terrorist offences on the books, and there's such a range, but those are like the basic ones. Some of the cases I've done, for example, I dealt with the Anjum Chowdhury and Mizan Rahman case. So I represented Mizan Rahman, and they were charged with a new piece of legislation that hadn't been used before. So there are lots of discussions about what amounts to a terrorist offence as opposed to freedom of expression. And so a lot of the terrorism cases give rise to lots of discussions in terms of what it means in terms of human rights law, because a lot of the time the laws are very new and they haven't been used before, and so nobody knows quite where the boundaries are and what lines have to be crossed for those offences to have been committed. And so it can be a little bit complicated. And so we had litigation in hearings that went from the Old Bailey to all the way up to the Court of Appeal several times, discussing what the scope of the law is. So that's one. There are lots of others. I do something called terrorism prevention and investigation measures. And so they're called TPIMs for short. TPIMs are where the state imposes certain conditions on somebody that they suspect to have been involved in terrorist activity, but they don't have evidence to take it to a criminal court. So in a criminal court, you've got to prove something beyond, so that you're sure, or people would say beyond reasonable doubt. But if they don't have sufficient evidence, or they don't want that evidence to come out in open court, then they put on a TPIM, and then they have proceedings in the High Court. So it would be like telling somebody to relocate, making them live in a particular building, imposing certain conditions like how much money they can have on them, who they can speak to, what they can do in terms of work or study, etc. So it can be quite a constraining set of rules. And so those not a lot of people tend to do, and there aren't lots of those cases either. But those are really interesting because you have something called secret evidence. And so what happens is the lay client or the person who's been subjected to TPIM will then have a solicitor and either one or two barristers, and we're called the open advocates. So we see evidence that's out in the open. What also happens is he then has a secret, a special advocate who gets to look at the secret evidence. And sometimes the secret evidence can trickle down to us. And so we can see some of it sometimes. And so I've been involved in cases of that nature where we look at what the intelligence services have said about somebody as to why they pose a threat to national security. So there are different types of cases, again, like radicalization cases. I think that it's still ongoing, but there was a period of time where there was a huge number of cases going into the family courts, whereby they were saying people were radicalizing their children, and then children were being taken away. And I don't think people know the full extent of what was going on at the time and how frequent it was becoming. We also know of Prevent, and again, there are lots of cases that come off Prevent. And Prevent is where, for example, a teacher will report a student saying that they're an extremist. And sadly, the way extremism is measured is just wrong in my view. And so if a child utters something which they think is inappropriate, then the child can be reported. And what that means is counterterrorism that get involved, social services get involved, and things become very difficult for that child or the family. And they look to assess whether or not that family or the child, whether they're extremists or not. So there's a whole range of different types of work and different types of cases that I guess come out of the area of work that I do. So was there a specific one that you wanted me to talk about?
No, it was just to see what kind of area that you do deal with so that the audience can gauge an understanding. I mean, one of the key things I think I should highlight at this point is a barrister is very different to a solicitor. So a solicitor will have the day-to-day running and the conduct of the file between themselves and the client, and also they'll be the go-between with the client and the barrister, unless the barrister is a direct access barrister, and those barristers are the type, I should say, where they don't need an instructing solicitor on most occasions, and they can deal directly with the client. So you are the traditional barrister where you'll need an instructing solicitor. So you wouldn't really be running the conduct of the file on a day-to-day. So that's one thing I did want to clear out. So I wanted our audience to gauge an understanding as to what kind of area of law that you do. And you mentioned, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen so many, I've heard so many horror stories, when people forward all those WhatsApp messages where they've said this has happened and that's happened, and they seem to be a lot on the rise when it comes to Prevent. And I'm actually not sure whether our audience or majority of the audience will even know what Prevent is. I appreciate you explaining that, but one of the things that you mentioned was the involvement of the state when it comes to if they suspect something of a child, and people don't understand how important it is. We unfortunately do live in a hostile environment, and we are looked upon in a completely different light. And I can't see it changing anytime soon. That's my personal opinion. But it reminded me of a couple of incidents, and I'm just going to quickly share that with the listeners. And it was, I am a divorcee and remarried. Majority of the people already know that. I've taken up my father's surname, so my maiden surname, along with my husband's surname mashed up. So I've got a hyphenated double-barrel surname. Whereas my daughter at the time had my ex-husband's surname. So she was a Patel and I was Zaeem-Sattar. And we were traveling, and we've done a fair amount of traveling. And sometimes, they just look at the passports, they look at the way my daughter looks at me. But on this particular occasion, we'd actually gone Saudi for Umrah. And on our way back from Umrah, me and my daughter had got separated from my husband and his family, because they had to go into a different line with my father-in-law in a wheelchair, and I was in the more traditional line. And we got there, we were absolutely battered, and we were so tired. We got to the border agency, the counter, and the guy was checking out our passports completely, totally in detail. And he turned around and asked he must have asked a question to my daughter, and her being her 8, 9 odd years old, doesn't understand why they're asking the question. And he goes, oh, where have you travelled to? So she proceeded to give the answer. And he goes, oh, well, where are you going? So she gave that answer. And then he turns around and he goes, well, where'd you go to school? So I tried to answer it, and he goes, excuse me, I'm talking to her. So she turned around and she goes, well, of course I go to school here. No, Leicester. No, here. No. And she got herself really confused, and I got scared. I was so scared that because she's not answering the question properly, that something's going to happen. And literally his shoulders squared up, his back straightened, and you could tell something was coming. And then she turned around and I said to her, Mahadia, and she goes, but Mom, he asked me, do you go to school here? I don't exactly go to school here in the airport now, do I? In Heathrow. I go to school in Leicester near our house. And I just looked at her totally, just completely in shock as to her response. And he just laughed.
It looks like you have a lawyer in the making there.
Oh man, please don't say that. I could tell you so many stories about what she comes out with. And he just looked at me and he laughed. He literally laughed. And he goes to me, he goes, never mind, I can tell she's your daughter. And I just looked at him and I went, well, thank you very much. She looks like me, but there you go. And as I left, that scared me so much that as soon as I even got out the airport, the first thing I did was I messaged her father and I said, we're changing her surname. She can have your surname, but she's at the same time going to have a surname that both me and my husband have. And immediately, with his permission, we did everything that we needed to, and we mashed up the surnames because it's just, we are living in that world. So it's very important for people to realize that our every move is being watched. We are living in that hostile environment. We do have to be careful. But at the same time, we have to remember where we are, and we have to protect ourselves and our environment and our family. And you mentioned prevent as well. Can we just go a little bit into prevent? Just if you can just clarify what that is again, please, just in case our listeners missed it.
Sure. So Prevent is a program that was developed by the government, and it was to, spot extremists so that they could prevent people from being radicalized and then being, groomed and being taken in by terrorist organizations. Because remember, a while back we had, when all the Syrian conflict was going on, we had instances where children were going abroad, and Shamima Begum being one of the prime cases. But Prevent started a while before that, and the idea was to stop this type of radicalization happening. And so what happened is that law was enacted to make it incumbent upon, for example, local authorities, for schools, for doctors, to report cases where they feel somebody may have been radicalized. And so what usually happens is if an incident like that occurs and it's reported, then counterterrorism, they call them prevent officers, but counterterrorism invariably gets involved, social services get involved, and a whole host of other agencies get involved. And then they look in to see whether the parents, what activities they've been up to, how, whether they are extremists, even though the word extremism isn't defined, and what action needs to be taken in relation to the children. And sadly, we've had, there are so many cases. For example, one case was, I think it was a small child who couldn't pronounce cucumber very well. I think he 5 or 6, I forget the age, somewhere between the ages of 4 to 6, and he couldn't pronounce the word clearly. And they took it to mean cooker bomb. And so then this all got reported to Prevent, and then you can imagine everything that took place. And so that's one example. There are lots and lots of examples where this has happened. In one case, again, a small child drew a picture where his father was holding a knife. And they said, oh, he's radicalized, it's all about beheading. And they called in Prevent again, counterterrorism, social services. And it turned out the child was drawing a picture of his dad cooking at home, and his dad is a chef. And so he was cutting things for cooking purposes. And so you have lots of incidents like that happen. And it's a duty upon schools, and it's a duty upon medical professionals to report situations where they feel somebody may have been radicalized or is at risk of being radicalized. So that's what Prevent is in a nutshell.
And, you know, it can range from everything, can't it? To video games as well, because one of the recent WhatsApps I saw, it was something about a child playing one of the games, and
Yes.
they got reported. So again, you know, I revert back to what I was saying before. We do live in a hostile environment. And, you know, again, it reminds me of another story. I've got so many stories with my 4 children. I've got so many, Sultana. But we were actually in France, and we were near the Notre Dame Cathedral. And there were armed forces there. And my son just, you know, I mean, he was 16 or something at the time, who's now 18. And he, as a joke, he mimicked the gunshot type of maneuver using his hands. And I went nuts. I went completely nuts. You know, I gave him the fish eyes, and I was muttering under my breath, and I, you know, grabbed him and I walked away, and I was like, what are you doing? Because you just can't fool around. You know, even if you're doing it innocently
Even
and
if it's
harmlessly,
joke,
it's just not a joke. And, you know, these things, and he just looked at him and he was like, chill, mom. And I said to him, I said, if you say to me, take a chill pill, you know what's coming next, you know, which I can't really say on the radio. But, you know, kids, bless them, they don't realize the seriousness of things. They live in their own little bubble. And unfortunately, we have to pop that bubble just to keep them safe, even though sometimes you don't want to, in order to protect them. But it is, you know, very, very difficult times that we are living in, and more so than ever. And we do have to have that awareness. We have to have that knowledge. The olden days where people could brush problems under the carpet, we need to move away from that attitude now, because it's all about the education, it's all about the awareness, and that's quite important. Now, I want to move on and talk a little bit about Muslim Lawyers Action Group, which I have the honor of being part of. And I joined, you know, about I think 6 or 8 months after its inception. I came across a post on LinkedIn and I joined. Now, can you just tell me a bit about why MLAG was created?
Yeah, sure. So the Muslim Lawyers Action Group was initially created. I mean, it was an ad hoc, it was a temporary group that was set up to just deal with COVID legislation. And in fact, just to deal with one bit of legislation which related to burials. Because what happened was I came across something which at the time when we had the first lockdown, which suggested that there was legislation, that law that was going to be passed, whereby people could be cremated if there were too many deaths and local authorities couldn't bury the bodies. And so that was obviously quite alarming from a Muslim perspective, and also quite alarming because I had COVID at the time, and I thought, gosh, if I die, I really don't want to be cremated. And there's a chance that the death toll might be quite high within the Muslim community. And again, nobody wants to be cremated. And so I, myself and a few other friends, we got together, a few other lawyers, and we wrote various documents on it. We wrote responses to the bill. We did a bit of lobbying with people from the House of Lords and some MPs to try and see if we can actually have some kind of impact, just to make sure that it doesn't happen. Ultimately, and we don't take credit for this, but lots of people were doing the work. But ultimately, the government said, look, it's unlikely it'll happen, but they didn't rule it out. And so it's still there in the legislation that it could happen, but thankfully, unfortunately, it hasn't, and hopefully the rates won't go up to such an extent that it ever needs to happen. So our community were very organized, I have to say, actually, because the mosques and funeral services, Muslim funeral services, were very, very organized. And I was incredibly proud, because I think I've never seen our community so organized. And that's the first time I saw it organized to such a fantastic level. And so, sadly, when people were passing away, the mosques and the funeral services were able to quickly bury the bodies. And because of that efficiency, it never came to that. But anyway, that's where the Muslim Lawyers Action Group came from. We then stayed together, and it sort of grew a little bit, simply so that we could advise people on what to do when situations were cropping up. So when people were on ventilators, what should they do? So medical issues, then it ranged or spanned to include like employment, what to do if you're on furlough, or what to do if you're being let go of. We looked at housing and also all sorts of other issues that affected people during COVID. As lockdown sort of eased up, we then also started looking at other areas. And so if anybody has a chance to go on the website, we can be found at www.mlag.legal. And we've got lots of resources up there, resources for women, resources for people who may be arrested, resources for people who go and protest. And then we've carried out lots of human rights projects amongst ourselves. The organization's grown, so we have quite a lot of lawyers on board now. And so we look at doing projects, human rights-based projects. And so we did some lobbying in terms of the Uyghurs, and we lobbied people in Parliament in terms of what's going on and in terms of recognizing it as genocide. We also take on strategic litigation, and strategic litigation means taking on a few cases. So unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to deal with lots of individual cases, lots of small cases. But what we want to do, and we try and do, is take on high impact cases. So cases that may have an impact, a significant impact upon the Muslim community. And the one that we're working on at the moment is in relation to the hijab ban, or proposed hijab ban in France. And we're looking at what measures we can take. And we are working with lawyers from France, and we're looking at what kind of litigation we can undertake in terms of stopping this law from coming into effect and stopping people from wearing the hijab in certain circumstances. So it's evolved. The organization is evolved. All of the lawyers contribute on a pro bono basis, which means they work for free. And the tricky thing is having the capacity to take on as much work as we'd like to, because people of course also have their day jobs. And Zainab, you're a huge part of MLAG, and we really appreciate everything that you do and the energy and enthusiasm you bring to it. And we need more lawyers like you.
My producer's clapping in the background. Thank you so very much for that, Sultana. Nice little plug. I am actually the head of the Social and Wellbeing group. I don't even know how I became the head, but there you go. That's how I became. I'm part of it, and I do honestly enjoy it, especially when everyone starts having their conversations, and you can see the passion oozing out, and then sometimes there's just like a quiet dip, so that everyone's really busy and they can't take any more on. So you can actually see in our messages, in our communication, how it's going with everyone. Now, before we move on to something else, there were a few things that you mentioned that I just want to quickly touch upon. For the purposes, for the benefit of our listeners, can you please explain what you meant when you said a bill? Because when I, as a layperson, heard the word bill, I'm assuming, supermarket, restaurant table. Yeah. So can you explain what a bill is, please?
Yeah, bill is proposed law. So it's proposed law that has to go through Parliament for it to be, and then there are votes that go on in Parliament. There's a whole process, and then ultimately the law is passed. So before the law is passed, it's called a bill. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Actually, can I just add a couple of things, actually? I mean, if there are students listening, we also have a student group within MLAG. And what we try and do is provide webinars and workshops for students. So people looking to become solicitors or barristers, and who are in the stages of law degrees or postgraduate law degrees, or also who might have done the LPC or the BVC and are looking for training contracts or pupilages. So we try and provide some level of support for students. We also, if there are lawyers listening, we try and provide support to lawyers in the form of continuous professional development events. So, specialist lectures on specialist areas of law, such as immigration, family law, and so forth. So a lot of these are also open to members of the public. So if people want to know something about a particular topic, they can come join it. I think one of the areas we've got in the pipelines is looking at Islamic marriages and divorces. That's something that should be coming up in the next few months, because some people may know, but the courts ruled not too long ago that Islamic marriages aren't recognized in UK law. And so what does that mean for people who have only had Sharia marriages? What does it mean in terms of what rights they have? For example, if they divorce, what rights does the woman have if she gets a divorce, for example? So we're looking at those types of topics. And also for lawyers, we're launching a program for judges to try and, I guess, push people forward into other roles, so judicial roles. So for lawyers, Muslim lawyers, to become judges, and also to become QCs or Queen's Counsel. So we're launching a program in conjunction with the Aziz Foundation to try and promote people into moving into those areas.
Sounds like very exciting times with everything happening. I appreciate you giving a bit more information on that. Again, you've touched on a few more things. So can I then ask, you use the word lobbying. What do you mean by lobbying?
So lobbying is speaking to people who are, in positions of power. So politicians, for example, people who sit in the House of Lords. So lobbying is, you've got to persuade them as to why they should adopt a particular position and why they should vote for or against a particular position. And so lobbying goes on behind the scenes. And we've done some lobbying directly ourselves behind the scenes. And we've also done lobbying in conjunction with SOAS, so the School of Oriental and African Studies. They've published some of our work, and the work that we've produced have been used to brief people in the House of Lords or members of Parliament so that they adopt particular positions. So lobbying is I guess, targeting politicians and trying to persuade them to either vote for or against something.
Okay. So from everything that you've said to me, what I'm taking from that is that you have been influential and quite important in certain aspects. And, I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone who it might have affected. That, without your efforts, these changes would not have taken place. And I'm quite eager to see what happens with your proposed, the papers that you're going to produce for the proposed ban in France, because we are in the UK, we're no longer part of Europe, and therefore how much influence and how much power will we actually have when it comes to trying to stop those bans? And you've got a fight ahead of you, and you're going, I hope, inshallah, you persevere and you continue, and I look forward to basically following that. Now, you also mentioned that something that MLAG was part of was the protests. And I remember the protests for the Palestinian Lives Matter. MLAG produced the arrest cards. And when I say arrest cards, it was a bit of guidance and a bit of information for protesters in the event that they are arrested. And actually, Sultana, I don't know if I told you at the time, I actually did end up using that arrest card and giving it to somebody.
You didn't get arrested, did you?
No, luckily, luckily I didn't. I did not attend the protest for fear of this, because I am quite vocal and I am quite I basically go into a fight as opposed to running away from one. And one of the first things my husband Samir said to me was, "No."
Never would have realised that about you, Zainab.
Oh, you don't even know the half of it, Sultana.
That was irony, by the way.
Thanks. I can't see you see, on the videos. I can't see the facial features. But yeah, I run into it. So straight away, my husband Samir was like, "Nope, we ain't going." So we were sitting, and what he did was he distracted me and he took me for tea just down the road from where I am in the studio. And we just happened to sit there, and we were talking, and we met up with a friend, social distancing rules and everything, restrictions were lifted at the time. And some young lads had walked in, and they were dressed top to tail, in the Palestinian flag and everything, and you just knew where they were either going or coming from. And it turned out that our friend knew one of the young lads, and he'd just been arrested, about 48 or 24 hours before, and he was held in the holding cell for 24 hours before being released. And I remember those arrest cards, and I airdropped it to him, and I said, "Look, next time it happens, use this, know your rights, because it's very, very important." And one of the things I did realize was, and I'm not sure if this is entirely correct, but the protest that he had attended at that weekend did not have legal advisors, not like the protests in London where MLAG did have volunteers who went down as legal advisors. And there was a lack thereof, which was a shame, really, because I don't know how many others were arrested or, on the verge of, whether anything came of that. But, to know that I was a part of something bigger, in that I was able to assist this young boy, even though I never went to the protest. And that's my personal stance on it. And people might hate me for it, and people might give me kudos for it. That's their opinion. But I know that in the background what kind of work I'm doing and how much assistance I'm giving. So I do know that MLAG, I'm part of something bigger, and we are affecting change, and we are helping where we can. But then you also mentioned Islamic marriages. I just want to touch upon that. Now, you mentioned that very recently Islamic marriages, the decision was made that it's not recognized as a form of wedding here in the UK. I do want to distinguish that for immigration purposes, because I did used to do immigration law. I no longer do it. I'm quite gladly no longer do it. So I do litigation predominantly and a little bit of employment. But I do know that the nikah and the nikah certificate is recognized as a form of marriage in order for a person from abroad to obtain their spouse visa. But that's very different to what you are saying in terms of Islamic marriages being recognized as a form of marriage when it comes to the rights of the man and woman here in the UK, when it comes to say things like
Divorce, for
divorce and
example.
things like that, or when it comes to the children. So that's quite key to distinguish. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about any of the projects or the projects? We have about 9 minutes,
Okay.
and I was just wondering whether you can go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for forwarding on the protest card. And again, it's just really important people know what their rights are. And we have lots of resources on our websites relating to rights in lots of different situations. And of course, going to a protest is good to know what your rights are. If you're stopped by the police or if you're arrested by the police, what do you do? And so please do, if people do have a chance, to go on the website and have a look and download some of the resources. Also, thank you, for all the work that you put into MLAG. And, we hope to become influential. I mean, we do have now, I think, about 100 lawyers who are quite active and who contribute to the work that we do. And so we've managed to, I guess, gather quite a lot of people who are active, so Muslim lawyers. And we hope that, we are, it is, I guess, an organization or a movement for change, in that we can benefit the community in some way using the skills and the knowledge that we have. And so it works because everybody contributes. And so your contributions and the contributions of others within the group is what makes MLAG, I guess, successful. So thank you for being part of that. And if there are other lawyers out there that'd like to join, then please do get in touch via the website. In terms of other projects, there are lots of things in the pipelines, I guess, but the main one we're focusing on is the hijab ban in France at the moment. We were also involved with an organization called Prevent Watch. And so Prevent Watch are probably the only organization that have dealt with the vast majority of cases of prevent that have taken place in the UK. So I think over the last 5 years, they've dealt with about 500 or 600 individual cases, and they provide support to people who find themselves in that situation. And so we're working on I can't say at the moment what it is, but it's under wraps at the moment, but there will be an announcement soon. But we're working on quite a big project with them, and that should be launched, I think, within the next month or so. So there will be information about that on our website and also on the Prevent Watch website. But part of what we want to do, again, terrorism laws really do affect the Muslim community. And we want to make sure things like Prevent don't continue to negatively impact our communities, and in particular our children. And it's something that you said, Zainab, at the beginning, that children should be allowed to be children, and that's really what we want ultimately. We don't want things that children children say all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, and they shouldn't be penalized for that, or parents shouldn't be made to feel that there are repercussions for that. Sadly, we live in a world where that is the situation, but we want to create a situation where that that climate of fear no longer exists. So we do quite a lot of work in that particular area. There are lots of other things that, I mean, in terms of MLAG, I'm also looking, there are lots of other organizations that I work with, and I'm looking to try and combine some of the work we do with MLAG with work that I do with other organizations. So I'm involved in another organization called the International Human Rights Law Association. And so I chair that. It's a fairly new organization. And so as part of that, we look at lots of international human rights issues. And so looking at how the International Criminal Court works, for example, what are some of the cases going through there, how international humanitarian law works. So international humanitarian law are the laws of war. So where there are wars going on, where there are conflicts going on, what kind of laws should apply, how should they be upheld, should there be accountability when people violate those laws of war? We look at things like business and human rights. Can big businesses violate human rights in countries and get away with it? So we look at it in terms of what kind of litigation can take place, how people can take them to court. So it's again a body of lawyers around the world. And so I'm looking at how MLAG can also work with that particular organization on particular issues. So there's a lot of room for different things. Zainab, I can see you're about to say something.
Well, I was going to say that you've got, alhamdulillah, you are part of so many different organizations. Where do you get the time, Sultana? Because you've got young children as well. Where do you get the time?
I don't know. I mean, I do sometimes think I take on too much and I do need to cut back. But, when opportunities come up, I guess to push for change, it's very hard to say no. And so I do work, unfortunately, quite a lot of the time. And in a strange way, actually, the lockdown has given me a bit of respite in the sense that the courts are closed. So I'm not in court as much. That's meant that, I've taken on far too much pro bono work as well. So I work with so many organizations that it does get a little bit difficult sometimes balancing everything. But
I was going to say,
I hope for more barakah in my time.
Inshallah.
But we can only do what we can do, and ultimately I try and do as much as I can. But I think there comes a cut-off point where we all have to say, okay, I can't do anymore. But I haven't reached that yet. I have my moments, but if I reach that, then I guess I'll have to draw the line and cut back on some of the things that I do.
Well, I hope you never get to that point, because it's always a bit difficult situation to be in, and it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. And actually, just before our show, me and my producer were talking, and I was just telling him how busy I've been on the weekends, and he was like, you need to learn to say the word no. And I said, well, I do know the word no, but it's a bit difficult given the situation that I'm in. And, sometimes it is very, very difficult. But, Sultana, you should just do what I do. I tend to put my husband in a cage and just let him deal with everything. And, he can sort everything out. But no, in reality...
I will put in my order on Amazon Prime for a cage for tomorrow.
I'll tell you which one. I'll tell you which one to order. He literally, me and him have this type of banter, and sometimes it puts a lot of people off because they don't know where that banter's coming from. And we'll be in a supermarket or anything like that, and he'll turn around and he'll make a comment to the cashier. And I'll say something back, and he'll turn around and he goes, oh, she's only let me out the cage today. So, I'm just using the opportunity. And I'll just look at him and say, right, you're on the sofa tonight. Forget the cage, you're on the sofa. So, it's this kind, but you need the support is basically what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need that support. And alhamdulillah, I've been very lucky, especially these past few years, where my children have literally stepped up. My husband stepped up. And I say that because he did, and speech marks or quotation marks here, accidentally applied for a job in Spain, and he started off for 8 months, leaving me and the kids here while I was a trainee, and he was in Madrid, living it large, in the hot weather.
What was the job?
Oh my God, he's an IT, so he ended up applying for a role there, and he was doing IT in an international bank in the English department. So he barely learned any Spanish, but he made some fantastic friends who are now actually my friends as well, with the amount of time I spent out there. But it's that support element. But when he then came back, well, when he wasn't there, the kids really stepped up, because I was also doing all of my voluntary roles as well. So there were times where in the evening, if I needed to cook or anything like that, my boys would sort everything out for me. They'd prepare the food, or they'd order takeaway, and they really stepped up and took care of their little sister and stuff like that. So the support element is very, very important. And, hats off to you on that one, Sultana, because sometimes you might not get the support, but you still end up doing what you need to because you've made a promise or you've made a commitment. And it's definitely not easy. And, you thank me, but I'm actually in awe of everything that you do. So what I do want to do...
Don't be, honestly. But I think, Zainab, I've learned I need to order that cage. And I also need to adopt your children, I think.
Yes, you can have them. You can have them.
Half of them.
Half of them. 2 with you and 2 with me. Brilliant. But you know what, one day, inshallah, I definitely will introduce you. So we have about 30 seconds left. So on behalf of all of our listeners and our viewers, I would like to thank you to
Thank
come
you,
on
Zainab.
Ramadan FM and sharing your background, sharing what it is that you do, what you are a part of, and especially the changes that you are trying to affect on our behalf, especially for those who don't have a voice. You are our voice, Sultana, and we truly appreciate that. So thank you very much. To all our listeners of Ramadan
Thank
FM,
you.
thank you very much for joining us. Please do join me again in July for the live show. In the meantime, you can continue to watch this on a loop. Thank you so much.